the title is a little bit of a misnomer because, for one thing, you can't really talk about the Table House without giving a lot of context. And 1925 was a big year for Meher Baba in terms of the Dhuni was lit for the first time, the Table House, the Jhopdi was there, but he used it a lot more in observed silence for the first time there. And he began writing his book for the first time. So it's the 100th anniversary of all those things. And they all took place in this little area of Lower Meherabad. And so there's an interconnection, which is kind of the point of what I'm going to be talking about. So, some of you may not even be familiar with Meher Baba's Table House. It was originally constructed in the 1920s, but it has been preserved, and it remains today at Lower Meherabad, where you will find it adjacent to the Jhopdi. Again, if you're not familiar, you haven't been to Lower Meherabad, you may not know that, but I'll talk more about that. The Jhopdi, and not far from Meher Baba's Dhuni platform. So those three things are going to be a kind of, I see them as being really intertwined. So the Table House is a particularly unique structure in many ways, not least of all because it has remained at Lower Meherabad for well over 100 years. Also, however, its history, as I've just said, is intertwined with Meher Baba's Jhopdi, his Dhuni, and because his missing book was largely, a large part of it was written in that little structure. So all of these, to my mind, and for most of us, all of them are pretty mysterious. Baba didn't, write books and give talks about what the meaning of all these things were, or why he had them, or why he preserved them there at Meherabad. But because of this, we'll be talking about all of these kind of mysterious topics in a way that I feel, and I hope you can understand that they're connected. So also to give some context before we begin, I want to say a little something about the way that I'll be approaching the topic. First of all, my intention, of course, is to communicate some accurate historical information. That is to say, I'll do my best to draw from reliable sources, both oral and written, and sources that are historically accurate to whatever degree we can accomplish that. At the same time, of course, I'm a follower of Meher Baba, and like so many of us, I like to reflect on what the spiritual meaning might be of what Meher Baba meant by this or that statement, and what he meant by this or that activity. So I want to do my best to be transparent about when I may be moving between those two domains, my own reflections and what, again, historical fact is a difficult thing to pin down, particularly in the Meher Baba's literature, but we're going to try to do that as well. Now, throughout what I have to say, I'll be emphasizing, to one extent or another, three different points of view, or three different ways of understanding Meher Baba's life and work, and in particular these three sites that I've been talking about. So first, it's the observable, concrete side of Meher Baba's life and work. Structures, dates, carpentry, daily routines, moving from place to place, things like that. For these details, I rely primarily on what factual information can be derived from Bhau Kalchuri's biography of Meher Baba, Lord Meher, and also to a lesser extent, some from what's called the Combined Diaries, which is a collection of diaries of Meher Baba's disciples from that 1920s period at Lower Meherabad. So the second source is, or the second kind of approach, is the mysterious, unseen side of Meher Baba's life and work. Meher Baba himself emphasized more than once that what people saw him doing in the physical world was not his real work, but that something else was going on behind the scenes. He even emphasized over and over again that he was not this body. So we're not going to get into the metaphysics of that, but just to realize and recognize that as a part of the religious narrative around Meher Baba is that there's some other, often he called it universal spiritual work going on in the background, behind the scenes. And of course, any attempt to try to understand that, except in the rare occasions when Meher Baba explicitly explained something, it would be, so, leaping into that, it's going to be my own and completely my own interpretation, usually based on my own understanding of what Meher Baba has said or written in his books, or derived, again, from the oral tradition from Mondley and Darwin and people like that. And then finally, there's my own conviction that much, if not all, of Meher Baba's work has a symbolic dimension. That is to say, in addition to its concrete manifestations, and in addition to his stated theological descriptions of his life and work, there is also an observable symbolic element, and I'll say more about that. But to say that Meher Baba's work is symbolic is mostly my own interpretation, although it is based on a long academic tradition of viewing religious phenomena as having symbolic value. And it's also based on the fact that throughout the discourses and other places, Meher Baba uses words like symbols, symbolic, symbolism in various places. And I've published a couple of articles in the Glow International magazine where I go into more detail about symbolism in Meher Baba's life and work. And you can refer to that sometime if you like. So in any case, I'm going to do my best to be clear about when what I'm saying is my own interpretation and what I'm saying is based on what we've been able to glean from the historical record. So because it is the 100th anniversary of Meher Baba's silence, his beginning to work on his mysterious book, it's two things it's the anniversary of, and the construction and the use of Meher Baba's table house, as well as the initiation of the practice of lighting the Dhuni at Lower Meherabad. That's four things it's the 100th anniversary of. We'll want to try to bring all of these different elements into discussion because they all happened. Those of you who have been to Meherabad, you know that all of these things are really condensed in this little bitty area of Lower Meherabad. And to me, it's just a very dynamic area and still very vibrant and alive. Now, they all seem to have an interwoven symbiotic relationship. I don't think any one of them can really be fully understood or even engaged with without some kind of reference to the others, because their initiation, their beginnings, their origins are all interconnected. So in that spirit, we're going to follow a chronological story of the development of the Jhopdi, the development of the table cabin. And I say table cabin because if you go into Lord Meher, for example, and you look up table house, you'll be very frustrated because they don't call it the table house. They call it the table cabin. In those days, they called it the table cabin. Today, there's the plaques and things that everybody refers to it as the table house. So we're going to look at the development of the Jhopdi, the table cabin, and the Dhuni, as well as Meher Baba's writing project, the famous book. I'm not going to say much about the book. Most of you have heard about the book. It's very mysterious. Baba spent a lot of time, energy, long stories about where it was, how he kept it, and then somehow it just disappeared into the ethers. And Seven mentioned a little bit about it last night about the book In God's Hand. I'm not going to touch any of that because that'd be a whole series of talks, I think. But that's a part of this whole collection of symbolic events at Lower Meherabad. So then from there, we're going to move with the table house to the Sai Darbar and Toka. Yes, Baba, they moved the ashram, the whole ashram to Toka at one point. And Baba, this is a huge, gigantic table made of teak, very, very heavy. One person couldn't even move it. And he put it on an ox cart and moved it to Toka. So clearly it had some importance to Meher Baba. So along the way, as we do that, we'll look at how these three Lower Meherabad sites, the Jhopdi, the Table House, and the Dhuni, form a kind of triangle of work linked to Baba's silence and to this mysterious book. I'll also share, as we close, some of my own personal reflections on these iconic sites. We'll look at how this triangle of sites, these three things, the Dhuni, Jhopdi, and Table House, can be contemplated through the lens of Satchit Anand, power, knowledge, and bliss. And to be clear, this last bit is completely my own sort of theological and symbolic reflection. It's not by any means meant to be understood as a definitive explanation. It's just something that I like. So I'm going to start out with the Jhopdi. And Jhopdi is I'm not sure if it's a Hindi, I think it's a Hindi word, simply means a hut or a small building. Now, after departing from Upasni Maharaj's ashram on Thursday, January 26th, 1922, Baba traveled to Bombay. And from Bombay, he wrote a letter to one of his earliest disciples, Sadashiv Patel, who lived in Pune. Baba requested the immediate arrangement for the construction of a Jhopdi, a thatched hut, for his personal use. He explicitly stated his intention to rest at night in this hut instead of staying at his parents' home upon his return to Pune. So this is significant because as soon as he left Upasi Maharaj, he no longer lived with his parents. He moved out into much like a lot of college students, into a thatched hut and stayed there. But it was a demarcation between his life with his family and really the beginning of his life as a spiritual master. Now, this picture here is living in this hut on Ferguson College Road, and they called it the Pune Jhopdi. This entire period of the Pune Jhopdi was actually very foundational for Baba's work, because the strict rules that he maintained at the Pune Jhopdi there's a lot of people that he had met and known while he was, for the 7 years he was going back and forth to Upasi Maharaj's ashram. He was in Pune, attracting people more and more, and those same people, when he moved into the Jhopdi, clustered around, and they became the early Mandali. Now, the Meherabad Jhopdi, so I just wanted to mention about that Jhopdi because it's this tradition of having a small cell-like place to live in that Baba started as soon as he left his parents' home, and then continued with the Jhopdi at Meherabad. As soon as he got to Meherabad, or soon after, they built a Jhopdi. It's a small hut-like building at Lower Meherabad. It's not a thatched hut like the Pune Jhopdi. If you've seen it, it's a nice kind of, as they say in India, a pucca building. The first mention of the Meherabad Jhopdi was that some work on the flooring was being done in April, on April 18th of 1924. So it predated these other events. But it seems clear that Meher Baba began using the Meherabad Jhopdi as a place to do seclusion work and to sleep at night soon after the building of it in April of 1924. And the first mention of Baba's active use of the Jhopdi is from May of 1924, when he used it for seclusion. And during this period, from May 1924 into and through 1925, in addition to sleeping there at regular interviews, he would sleep in the Jhopdi. He also used the Jhopdi for short retreats and for seclusions, and at least one earlier period of silence and fasting prior to 1925. And there's a talk that I did at the center a couple of years ago on Meher Baba's silence. And in that, if you want to look that up on the center website, it's got all the details of the early silences he did building up to the final silence, which was a lifelong silence. So just because there are these cells, there's the Jhopdi in Pune, there's the Jhopdi at Meherabad, and then there's the table house, I want to just say a little bit about seclusion cells in general as a sort of a phenomenon in the spiritual and religious world. And so across many religious traditions, there is a recurring theme of creating what we might call a spiritual cell, a very small enclosed space dedicated to inner transformative work, from the mud brick cells of the Egyptian desert fathers to the Sufi chilakana, to the Buddhist kuti in the Thai forests, and the simple kutir or cave of the Hindu renunciates, and even the Prophet Muhammad himself received his first revelation in a cell-like cave just outside of Mecca. So there's this theme, you see, of cell-like places. And these cells are not just shelters. They're deliberate spiritual tools designed to strip away distraction and confront the spiritual aspirant or practitioner with the contents of their own mind and heart. So in that broader context, it's not surprising that Baba's early work at Meherabad gathers itself around two such cells, the Jhopdi and later the cramped cupboard of the table cabin, where he chose to withdraw, to fast, and to write his book. And we'll say more about that as we go along. That's just an example of a cell. This is I think it's a Christian monk's cell. For Baba, this Meherabad Jhopdi is the first such cell at Meherabad, and there were many. There used to be cells, meditation cells outside the Samadhi, and on, a lot of different places where Baba, even the crypt itself of the Samadhi is a place where he would retire for spiritual work. So from Baba's own statements, we'll want to make a distinction between the use of such cells by aspirants and spiritual seekers, and why Baba used them, the use to which Baba put them. Baba repeatedly affirmed that since he already enjoyed full realization of the I am God state, he did not engage in such seclusions in order to achieve anything for himself, but in order to do spiritual work for humanity. As I said, universal spiritual work for humanity was the sort of watchword for all the things, very often very unusual things that Baba did. He said, this is all a part of my work. Now, getting back to the Jhopdi, this is a modern day picture of the Jhopdi. Late in June 1925, Baba announced that from 10 July, he would keep silence for 1 year. He has noticed, he had a notice put up at Meherabad, and letters were sent out and announcing this to different disciples. And he later, it became clear, I don't know if he said this or if other people said it, but Mero was already upset that he was going to be silent for a year. If he had told people that he was going to be silent for the rest of his life, probably they wouldn't have believed it. And also, because he was very verbose, very talking and singing all the time and very active. And people found it hard to imagine he was going to, the disciples among themselves said, well, he's never going to keep silence for the whole year. He'll back off, because he had done that. He'd started a little bit and gone for a week or so and then started talking again. So on the 9th of July, he gave final spoken instructions to the men and the women. And on the 10th July, his lifelong silence began. Baba emerged from the Jhopdi as usual, but from that day forward, he spoke only with the board and later with hand signs. And of course, when he actually started, it wasn't with the board. He used just slates, but those are just details. But the point is, he never did speak again in the same way he had previously. So the Jhopdi is truly the birthplace and the origin point of Meher Baba's lifelong silence. Now, interestingly, only 3 days later, on the 13th July, he begins writing his book. He announced that he was going to be writing a book. He writes it in the Jhopdi daily, often early in the morning. Then he would go out and supervise the school. Then now, by this time, there was a Meher school there. I think the Hazrat Babajan school was there. There's a lot of different schools were going along. I'm not sure which was when. But he would be doing that, all of this in silence, working with the villagers, working with his mandali, working with the schools, all completely while observing silence. And during this period, he does not allow anyone to see what he is writing in this mysterious book. Now, there's a character in the, some say a member of the mandali named Ajoba. He was a Christian carpenter. His name was Gangaram Pavar. He was a regular visitor to Meherabad at this time. Some sources include him as one of the mandali. Apparently because Pavar was older than the other mandali, Baba nicknamed him Ajoba, which means grandfather. And an interesting thing that I learned when I was at Meherabad this year, talking to Jessica Mednick and Meredith Klein in the archives, they have just a couple workers there who I think they're part security, they're part maintenance people, but they're from the village, they're from the Erangan village. And so they started employing them to go into the village and find people who either their grandparents or somebody had had interactions with Baba. Maybe they worked at the Meherabad, worked with Baba, and getting all these different stories. It's really wonderful, kind of a field research project they've enlisted these men to do. Very sweet men. I got to meet them. And the reason I bring this up is that they couldn't find anything about Ajoba. Everybody's very interested in this man Ajoba because he worked on the, there's just a lot of things written about him. He turned out he was a Christian, but no one in the village had ever heard of him. They didn't know anything about him. And they finally found out that there's what do they call it, a Christian community of Indian Christians who are in Nagar. And he was a part of that community, and his family is still there, so they found his family. I don't know what they've learned yet about that, but so it turns out he was from this Christian community, but he somehow got involved with Baba. He was an expert carpenter, and he was devoted to Baba and skilled as a carpenter in Baba's service. And sometime in September 1925, Ajoba began work on what was to become the table house, or as they say in the literature, the table cabin. Now, it seems that other carpenters were also involved in the building of the table cabin, but Ajoba was the supervisor. He overlooked and put the whole thing together. And like I said, it's just the cost of teak today, you could never make something this big. Huge, big planks on the top, and the whole thing is incredibly heavy. all made of teak. So according to Lord Mayher, quote, the master had ordered a Jhopdi to construct a large teak wood table, 15 3/4 feet long, 5 3/4 feet wide, and 4 1/4 feet high. And this is in feet and inches. I think they must have actually done it in meters, but who knows. But in any case, attached underneath it, he was to build a small cabin of the same width, but only 8 feet long and 3 feet high. The table cabin was built in such a way that there was just enough room inside for a person to sit. So this was not simply standard furniture. It wasn't a table, it wasn't a dinner table. It was a carefully engineered enclosure specifically designed by Baba for this particular work that he wanted to do. And at first, it was probably built near the post office. I don't know. They don't really specify. They just say that it was near the post office originally. But then on October 4th, 1925, Baba had the table house shifted to a spot under the neem tree. And I'm telling you, if you ever get to Meherabad and you try to lift that table house, shifting it from anywhere is a big job. It was very, very heavy. So it's moved to a spot under the neem tree, and near as I can tell, we should sometime ask Peter Nordine, he probably knows, but I think the neem tree they're talking about is the neem tree that Baba first sat under near the well when he first came to Meherabad for the first time. So Baba's Guddi, this is the teak divan, which is now kept under, it's like a couch or a chaise lounge, kept on Meherabad Hill under the tin shed, and this is Sam Karawal's mummy, Banu Masi, sitting next to the Guddi. It was placed alongside the table house, and a hand mill, that's for grinding grain, was fixed near the table where Baba and his brother Jal would grind grain every day. Now, on the 11th of October, 1925, after a village program, Baba returned to Meherabad, left the Jhopdi, and began spending the night inside the cupboard space of the table house. So this is the first time he shifted from the Jhopdi to the table house on 11th October 1925. So from that day, he would write continually inside that cramped space. He began fasting on water and weak tea, and he instructed the mandali not to come near, and he withdrew from the ashram to games. Every day there'd be a break, either after lunch or something, and they would play various gilli danda, different Indian games. But he withdrew, and he loved these. He loved playing cricket and all these things, but he focused all on this project of writing and being in the table house. So at this time, there also was a severe drought in the region. Crops were failing, and water was scarce. So the Arangan villagers came to Baba at Meherabad, and they pleaded to him for help. And one night, the 10th of November, 1925, near the table cabin, after Arti to Upasani Maharaj was sung, and this was a regular feature even from back when Baba was in Pune, they would do an Arti to Upasani Maharaj. So after that was done, Baba ordered that a pit be dug and a fire lit. Now this is a really important photo, which I'll say a little more about in a minute. But so the Dhuni, this pit was the Dhuni. The Dhuni was lit late that night near the table cabin. There were no clouds yet. Within a short period of time, heavy rains began to fall, and they continued for many hours, saving the crops. The villagers interpreted this as Baba's miracle, and of course were deeply grateful. Now, the reason I say this is an important historical photo is for several reasons. First of all, you see this little platform in front of the table house. That's where Baba's divan would be placed. They put Baba's divan there, and he would give darshan from there. Right in front of that, you see this kind of a piece of tin over the ground that's covering the hole, which was the original Dhuni. And that's where the Dhuni was lit, what was just described. And this little tin in front of that was a tin where they would keep the Dhuni ash. Wouldn't you like some of that Dhuni ash? So that's, and even more important, as far as we know, this is the only photograph, or one of the only photographs, certainly, of the side darbar. And I'll say a little bit about the side darbar later, but that's on the other side of the road. And when the crowds became so big, they couldn't be accommodated in that little area of Lower Meherabad and in front of the table cabin where they would meet Baba. Baba had a Jhopdi again build this little thing he called side darbar. So soon after this event of the rains and digging the pit with the Dhuni, Meherabad composed a poem in Gujarati praising the Dhuni as something wonderful, unique, and powerful. And eventually, in December of 1941, Baba gave the order that the Dhuni should be lit on the 12th day of every month. And that tradition continues today. And each time the Dhuni is lit, so far in my lifetime, it's been Alan Wagner is the one who reads out this poem. He previously, Padre would read, I don't know if it was this one, but Padre would be involved, and he passed it over to Alan. So this is the poem that Baba wrote in praise of the Dhuni. It's a translation. There are many different translations. This is the one we're going to read. So he says, anyone who befriends you, he's singing to the Dhuni, anyone who befriends you can be benefited by utilizing you for the purpose of cooking hundreds of dishes. But for the ignorant one who affronts you or treats you carelessly, you are a calamity to him or her. Your qualities are those of a wali. Wali is a saint. In one translation, it reads, you have the power of a sixth plane saint. He says, those who affiliate themselves with you become like you. Marvelous is your work. Wonderful is your play and your nature. You are like a wali, full of virtues as well as faults. You make one swim and another drown. Such is your nature. O Dhuni of Meherabad, the region of Ahmednagar was desolate without water, but recognizing the perfect moment, you rewarded the labor of the farmer. In the form of fire, you were hot and fierce, but becoming water, you became soft and gentle. Just as those near you were warmed by your heat, so also was the whole creation made happy by your light and relief. Limitless is your greatness, O Dhuni. Only rishis and munis, or sages, can fathom you. You made Behram sleep and the sky weep. Your warmth melted the clouds in the heavens, wetting my sadra and dagla. Dagla is like an overcoat. You are the true slave and servant of the Sadguru. Stay near him always. May you go on giving your grace to one who longs to receive it from you. May you give relief and healing to thousands. May you receive the blessings of the helpless poor. And isn't that interesting that he says that the Dhuni is powerful, it receives blessings from the helpless poor. So that's how seriously Meher Baba regarded his Dhuni. Now, just again, kind of an aside, as I was saying with the cells, this is a kind of a historical theological note about sacred fires in general. Sacred fires belong almost universally to many ancient spiritual religions. Across cultures, fire has been treated as far more than just a symbol. It is the only element human beings can kindle, tend, and extinguish, yet it always retains a certain independent autonomy that resists complete human control. From the Vedic Yajna altar, where the fire god Agni carries offerings to the celestial gods and sustains cosmic order, to the Zoroastrian fire temple, where the fire embodies the very presence of divine truth. These traditions all bear a similarity to the council fires of Native Americans and other indigenous traditions. The sacred flame functions as a mediator, a witness, and an active, living presence at the heart of religious life for many peoples, past and present. These are ancient, even prehistoric traditions which date back many thousands of years. When Meher Baba had the Dhuni pit dug and lit in front of the table cabin at Meherabad, he was working within this deep cultural, cross-cultural tradition of tending a concrete, earthly fire that has, from the beginning of recorded history, evoked the power and the presence of something unseen. So by mid-November, Baba settled into a daily rhythm in pretty much this same spot here in this table house. In the morning, he would write his book in the table house, underneath the table, in the cupboard part under the table. In the afternoon, he would supervise the daily ashram work with the people in the school, and would work with the villagers and various construction projects they had going on. And late in the afternoon, he gave darshan on the seat between the table cabin and the Dhuni. And that's this platform again. You don't see it now because underneath that little piece of cloth is where the divan is, the guddy, as they call it. But they would take the guddy out and put it on that platform, and then people would come in and take Baba's darshan. This is it's supposed to be, it says a map of historic Meherabad. It's not the way it was in the 20s, but now this, if you can see, this is where the Dhuni is now. Now, as far as I can reckon, as far as I can understand, of course, the men's Mondelez graves weren't there then, but this little blob over here, this is a neem tree. I believe that's where, in that area is where the table house was, and the Dhuni was in front of that. Today, the Dhuni is moved over here. The table house is just below it. You can see, and then there's the Jhopdi. But they're a very iconic presence today, even now, at Lower Meherabad. So by late 1925 and early 1926, the number of visitors was so overwhelming, tens of thousands coming for darshan, that the triangle area, this area that I'm just showing you, at Lower Meherabad was too small to manage these crowds safely and easily. So that was when they began the construction of this thing called the Sai Darbar. And the Sai referred to Sai Baba, and Darbar means the royal courts. And they use this term in Sufism. So it's the royal court of Sai Baba is essentially what it was being. So it's in reference to Baba's reverence for his master Sai Baba. And Baba selected a site near the post office for a new, larger pandal area to be constructed. Now, as near as I can figure, I'm pretty sure that this is a photograph of a cabin he had, and we'll see this in a second. Baba had a Joba build a little cabin on top of a platform under this new pandal, the Sai Darbar. And this, of course, Baba's divan, his guddi was moved in front of that. But he would retire into that cabin behind that, and then when people would gather, he would come out and give darshan. So again, Joba supervised the building of what came to be called the Sai Darbar, and another small box cabin was built on the stage. And this large structure was roughly 96 by 66 feet, and it was made of bamboo matting and corrugated iron. And this, down the bottom, you can see this little drawing. I think most of you can see it. And you can see that there's a platform, there's that little box cabin on top of the platform, and then the rest of the area there for people to gather. So Baba sat in the small box-like cabin during major programs. Now, for big public events, especially his birthday in 1926, Baba would now, instead of greeting people at the table house, he would greet them at the Sai Darbar cabin. The table cabin and the Dhuni remained important, but the main public darshan space in this was this now big hall. Now, there's so much. It's very easy to get into digressions and things because soon after this, actually before the building of the Sai Darbar, Baba said he was going to stay in this spot for 1,200 years, and then immediately he moved everything to Toka. So but when I say he moved, now remember, there's several schools. These are all the school boys. This is the Prem Ashram and the regular Meher Ashram boys. He moved the entire school, the entire ashram, everything, and he even had, those of you who have been on some of the tours, when we go to Meherabad, you sometimes take a tour to like Aurangabad or to Kuldabad or the Ellora Caves. You go by this confluence of the river, of the Pravara River, and right at that confluence is where this Toka ashram was. It was made of, there were improvised Tata quarters at Meherabad were all dismantled, and all those materials were set up again in Toka. And this is, even today, that would be a big job if you had lorries and all these things, but this is they had bullock carts and tongas and things like that. It was a very big, very, very difficult thing to accomplish. So on the 30th of May, 1928, the table cabin by the Dhuni was loaded onto a cart, pulled by 4 oxen, and taken to Toka. There, a new temporary structure was erected, many new ones, but also a Dhuni pit was dug near the table cabin. So just the same as Baba wanted the Dhuni to be near the table cabin at Meherabad, when he moved it to Toka, again, he wanted a Dhuni right near the table cabin. So on June 22nd, 22nd of June 1928, Baba entered seclusion inside the table cabin at Toka, fasting and limiting communication And there's some talk. The Lady Monley were very upset because they thought he was doing that to punish them. They thought he was mad, and they had to send a special message out saying, no, it's for my spiritual work. Everything's fine. So then this went on for some time, and then once again, Baba said, no, we're taking this all down. He folded up the Toka ashram, closed all the schools, and by late November 1920, he sent many of the boys home. By late November 1928, Baba leaves Toka. All the temporary structures that they had built there were torn down, and everyone returned to Meherabad, except for many of the boys who were sent back. So from this point on, the table cabinet no longer stands at the center of Baba's work in the same way, but even till today, it's still there at Meherabad. Baba's work shifted to other locales and other kinds of structures, though the pattern of seclusion cells and occasional lighting of the Dhuni continued. And as I said, in December of 41, became a regular feature on the 12th of December. Now, a year earlier, prior to the move to Toka, Baba had given the order that before 1st November, I want you to dismantle the school, the dispensary, the hospital, Sai Darbar, Upasani Sarai, and the leper ashram, leaving only the Makan intact. And we don't need to go into what all those structures are. The main thing is he had everything torn down. And the Mandali were like, what? Why? Why? We just we went through all this trouble. But Baba explained, quote, all these are just the scaffolding for my work, and the scaffolding is unnecessary once the actual building is completed. Close quote. So, first of all, it suggests that some internal mysterious part of his work, some internal building was completed, so the scaffolding is taken away. Now, as I just described with Toka, and so many of Baba's projects and buildings were used temporarily and then torn down or discarded or abandoned. And apparently they were all discarded because they were simply the scaffolding. And as he had said, the scaffolding is unnecessary once the actual building is completed. So why am I going into all this? This being the case, we can, I think, reasonably ask the question, why then do the Jhopdi, the Dhuni, and the table house still remain standing at Meherabad today? It would seem that they are more than simply scaffolding. To my mind, they represent a living presence at Lower Meherabad. This living presence becomes quite evident on the 12th of every month when the Dhuni is lit and people come from all around the world to take part in this event, an event ordered by Meher Baba himself. And I saw this on July 12th of this year. Massive, thousands and thousands of people came for Baba's Silence Day, 100th anniversary of Baba's silence. And of course, 2 days later, it was a Dhuni, and what a Dhuni it was. It was, there were just thousands of people trying to get to the Dhuni. So it was very much, wow, very much a living presence. So now, as I've said, it's my conviction that in addition to the practical and theological aspects of Meher Baba's life and work, there's also a symbolic aspect. And again, this is my own reflections on these things. My understanding is that not only are symbols multivalent means simply that they have many meanings. They have multiple meanings, different meanings for different people. This is one reason symbols are valuable and important. But they also symbols bypass the thinking mind. This tendency to speak directly to the heart and to people without any rational explanations, I feel, can speed up one's ability to develop their intuition. We intuitively sense that something is going on, and we can bring our hearts into alignment with it, even though we have no immediate rational explanation for the phenomenon that we're experiencing. Well, this is how I feel about all of Meherabad, and especially at Lower Meherabad, where these three iconic structures remain. While contemplating these three structures one day, I came upon the idea that symbolically, the Dhuni represents power, the table represents knowledge, and the Jhopdi represents bliss. This is the ancient Hindu trinity of Sat Chit Anand, power, knowledge, and bliss that Baba spoke of so often. And I have a song about Meherabad called Meherabad Sat Chit Anand, where I kind of sing about that. But as I've said, I don't claim this to be a final truth or even any truth at all. It could be just something I made up. But it's for me, it resonates. And for me, it's a helpful way to think about the dynamic beauty which seems to flow effortlessly from the very ground of both Upper and Lower Meherabad. So it's been my pleasure and privilege to share with you these ideas in celebration and remembrance of the 100th anniversary of Meher Baba's silence, the 100th anniversary of his Dhuni, and the 100th anniversary of his table house. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Meher Baba.